Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Hey there. Glad to be here for this.
So today we have a really interesting mission for you. We're going to dive straight into a sequential analysis of today's 7 key articles.
Right, and we're not going to waste any time with long preambles. We're just extracting the most vital insights from the source material.
Exactly. I mean, we're looking at everything from surviving global supply chain collapses to curing deadly skin cancer. And honestly, it's wild how it all connects.
It really is. It covers a huge spectrum from Middle Eastern geopolitics all the way down to, well, the microscopic architecture of human cells.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this by jumping into our first article from the editorial section, which is all about this profound reset in India's foreign policy regarding West Asia.
Right, the shift toward hard realism.
Yeah, and there are like 2 massive trends here. First, there's just this unprecedented level of diplomatic engagement. I mean, the Prime Minister has made 15 separate visits to the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries.
Which is a huge increase from historical norms.
Totally. And we're talking about $160 billion in bilateral trade now, plus a diaspora of 10 million people. And then the second trend is the GCC itself is looking for new security beyond the old Pax Americana.
The 8-decade-old U.S. security umbrella, yeah.
Right. It's like India decided to stop performing a balancing act on a tightrope and instead just started building a solid concrete bridge.
I like that analogy. It's very apt. Because historically, the source notes that Indian diplomacy relied on what they call please-all mantras.
Like trying not to step on anyone's toes.
Exactly. They maintained this super cautious equilibrium. They would balance their statements on, say, the two-state solution or Iran's nuclear tech just to avoid offending any single partner.
But now they're just dropping that entirely.
Pretty much. They're adopting hard realism. They state their strategic views directly now without needing third-party endorsements. But this has sparked a lot of domestic criticism.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, observers point out the timing of the Prime Minister's visit to Israel. It was on February 25th and 26th.
Wait, that was just days before the February 28th offensive, right?
Exactly. So critics argue it was strategically untimely. And the text impartially reports that there are debates about a perceived abandonment of the Palestinian cause. Plus, there are fears of strategic overreach, like this activist approach might expose the country to entirely new security liabilities.
Okay, but from the GCC's perspective, I mean, why are they suddenly looking away from the West? Why are they so eager to find new partners?
It's basically a breakdown of the historic Oil for Security Compact. The U.S. recently joined Israel in military actions against Iran, but they didn't give prior notification to the GCC.
Oh, wow. So they just completely sidelined them.
They sidelined their cautionary advice, yes.
Yeah.
And for the Gulf states, they fear the U.S. might just abruptly end its military campaigns and exit the theater entirely.
Which would leave them totally exposed to Iran's wrath.
Right. They need a hedge against Western unpredictability.
So, bringing this back to why this matters to you, the listener, India is positioning itself as a sort of GCC +1 alternative hub, right?
Yes, that's the strategy.
And if that works, it directly impacts your economic future. It stabilizes global supply chains, which means your job market and even your grocery bills are insulated from the next big shock.
It acts as a massive macroeconomic buffer.
Right. So transitioning from that, just as we see international policy leaning into realism, our second editorial article shows we desperately need that same realism in domestic policy.
Specifically regarding how we fund climate action.
Yeah. Because we're looking at the Union Budget 2026, and there's this staggering 20,000 crore rupee outlay for a carbon credit program.
It's a massive amount of capital.
It is. But I have to push back on something here. Wait, so the viral social media narrative I keep seeing about farmers getting a brand new income stream from this budget is entirely false.
What's fascinating here is how the broad terminology just completely created a parallel reality online.
How so?
Well, the Department of Science and Technology, the DST, released a very rigid roadmap. That 20,000 crore is strictly ring-fenced for CCUS.
Which stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, right?
Correct. And that is aimed exclusively at hard-to-abate smokestack industries. Think commercial steel manufacturing and massive cement production plants.
So why are they getting all the money and agriculture is just totally excluded from this specific fund?
It's just the physical mechanics of the emissions. In a cement plant, the CO2 comes out of a localized point, like a smokestack.
Right, so you can just stick a filter on it.
Exactly. You retrofit it with point source capture tech. But agricultural emissions are diffuse. They are biologically mediated through soil respiration or, livestock digestion.
Yeah, you can't exactly put a mechanical scrubber over a 1,000-acre wheat field.
Precisely. The confusion stems from that broad term, carbon credit program. The media blurred the lines between this highly technical industrial fund and the voluntary agricultural carbon market.
Oh, I get it. So they're two totally different things, and blurring them just creates a massive policy blind spot.
It really does.
Okay, so that perfectly transitions us to Article 3 in the opinion section. Because just like we need to untether from these misaligned climate narratives, this article argues we need to untether from archaic educational frameworks.
Specifically in Indian higher education.
Right. So the text introduces the National Education Policy 2020 objective, which is to phase out the college-university affiliation system over 15 years.
Which is a massive structural shift.
Yeah, it is. Because reading about the current setup, it sounds like a massive corporate headquarters trying to micromanage the daily menu of hundreds of local franchise restaurants. It's just too slow.
That's the exact systemic inefficiency the authors point out. You have these resource-strained universities that should be pushing the boundaries of research and innovation.
But they aren't.
No, because they are completely bogged down. They spend all their time evaluating hundreds of thousands of undergraduate answer scripts and ensuring administrative compliance across all these affiliated colleges.
That sounds like a nightmare. And it prevents quick curriculum updates, right?
Exactly, which is disastrous in fast-moving fields like tech. A curriculum reform might take years to pass through all the university syndicate meetings.
By the time you take the class, the tech is totally obsolete.
Right. So the proposed solution in the NEP is relying on the NIRF, the National Institutional Ranking Framework.
So basically giving colleges graded autonomy to innovate freely based on their rankings.
Exactly. As they prove their capability, they get the freedom to design their own courses and assessments.
Nice. Which links directly to our fourth article, also in the opinion section. Because if you give these knowledge hubs foundational educational autonomy, you have to look at how states actually fund them.
And the piece uses Tamil Nadu's fiscal blueprint as a case study.
Yeah. So TN has this huge ambition to become a $1 trillion economy by 2030. And they are spending a lot on climate, like over 21,000 crore allocated to the energy department in 2025-26 alone.
It's a massive deployment of capital for green infrastructure.
But I have a critical pushback here. With all this spending on green energy, but relatively low spending on fundamental research, are they just buying the latest green gadgets instead of learning how to invent them?
The authors of the article validate your point entirely. They highlight a really massive disparity.
Let's hear the numbers.
Tamil Nadu currently spends under 0.5% of its GSDP on R&D.
Wow, less than 0.5%.
Yeah. And the text compares that to South Korea, noting that when South Korea was at a similar economic stage, they were spending 1.2% on R&D.
That's a huge difference in priorities. And what's the direct consequence of that?
Well, despite TN being a national leader in solar installations, over 80% of their photovoltaic modules are imported.
So they're just subsidizing foreign manufacturing.
Right. Now, the text does note a recent 100 crore budget for new basic science centers.
Okay, so that's a start.
It is, but the article emphasizes that without more underlying IP creation, the state remains a consumer, not a creator.
Yeah, you have to invent this stuff to really capture the economic value.
Exactly.
Well, to truly understand the value of that underlying basic research, we just have to look at today's science section, which is Article 5. It features this mind-blowing cancer breakthrough.
The NIH study on melanoma metastasis.
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting. The cancer cell's nucleus literally changes from a hard golf ball into a squishy water balloon so it can squeeze through tight spaces in the body.
It is a terrifying biological mechanism. The study explains that this is driven by high cholesterol in the nuclear envelope.
The envelope is like the shell around the cell's DNA, right?
Exactly. And this high cholesterol is driven by a specific protein called the lamin B receptor, or LBR.
Okay, so the LBR pulls in cholesterol, makes the nucleus squishy, and that lets it travel through the body.
Yes, that deformability is what allows metastasis. But there's a catch. That excess cholesterol makes the envelope incredibly fragile.
Wait, if it's fragile, doesn't it just tear?
It does. As it squeezes through tight spaces, the envelope tears, which causes severe DNA damage.
So shouldn't that kill the cancer cell?
You'd think so. But as the cell repairs that damaged DNA, it makes errors. And those errors lead to even more aggressive mutations.
Oh, wow. So the act of moving literally forces it to mutate and get stronger? That's awful. But they found a way to slow it down, right?
Yes. The researchers noted that patients taking statins, which are common cholesterol-lowering drugs, showed noticeably slower cancer progression.
Because it stops the nucleus from getting squishy in the first place.
Exactly. But crucially, the article highlights the curiosity-driven origin of this entire discovery.
This is my favorite part. It didn't start with cancer research at all, did it?
No. It all started in the 1970s with basic biology research on fungi sterols. They were just trying to understand how fungi synthesize their version of cholesterol.
So, bringing it back to you, the listener, this proves that funding basic science, even when we don't know the immediate application, literally saves lives decades later.
You never know where the underlying knowledge will lead.
Right. But curing diseases and driving these leaps, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires massive, cross-border scientific ecosystems.
Which transitions us to Article 6 in the Text and Context section regarding the BRICS STI alliance.
Yeah, STI standing for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And the article outlines how BRICS is expanding to include nations like Iran and Egypt, and India is taking the 2026 presidency.
It's an attempt to build a multipolar innovation framework.
But wait, I have to jump in with a sharp pushback here. If we look at the numbers in the text, gross domestic expenditure on R&D is pretty low across these countries, except for China.
Right, there's a big imbalance.
So isn't this just a massively mismatched group project where one person does all the work?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the authors do acknowledge that wide innovation gap, especially compared to nations like South Korea.
Okay, so they admit it's a problem.
They do, but they explain that the nature of BRICS joint research is evolving. It's moving away from just basic science and focusing heavily on AI, public health, and high-performance computing.
But how do they actually coordinate that if the funding is so unbalanced?
Well, the article points out that the current rotating annual presidency is a major bottleneck. You can't run a long-term mega science project if the leadership changes every 12 months.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the proposed solution?
Establishing a permanent secretariat modeled after the EU Horizon program.
Ah, so a centralized body to manage funds and keep things stable.
Exactly. It would manage the funds, scale what they call paired links, matching one country's technical strength with another's resources, and run those long-term projects.
Okay, so that's how international alliances try to build new frameworks for progress. But transitioning to our final piece, Article 7, also in text and context, we see that powerful institutions also build hidden frameworks.
The frameworks used to justify their most harmful actions.
Great. And this brings us to Albert Bandura's 1990s concept of moral disengagement. I read this and it blew my mind. So you're telling me it's not that these institutions suddenly lose their morals, but they literally hack their own moral code using language.
That is precisely what the text details. It impartially breaks down the psychological and linguistic mechanisms.
Like what?
Well, there's moral justification, where you reframe a harmful act as serving a higher purpose. Then there's advantageous comparison.
Like saying, well, what we did wasn't as bad as what they did.
Right. And the diffusion of responsibility, where bureaucracy is so layered that no single person feels accountable.
Because everyone just says they were following orders or it was a committee decision.
Exactly. But the text really highlights euphemistic labeling.
The examples in the article were wild.
Yes. The text points out how militaries call civilian deaths collateral damage, or how institutions frame the exploitation of young women merely as minor deviants.
Which completely sanitizes the reality of the abuse.
It does. And it extends to the modern day. The text notes how tech companies scraping user data without consent call it technological progress rather than theft.
It's just a way to avoid looking in the mirror. And this gets amplified by the media, right?
Yes. The article brings in Irving Goffman's media framing theory. It explains how media outlets inadvertently amplify these sanitized narratives when they adopt the institutional jargon.
Wow.
This raises an important question about how you consume news. The text argues that understanding these mechanisms is your armor against bureaucratic manipulation.
Yeah, once you see the euphemisms, you can't unsee them. Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to ponder today, merging a few of our deep dive themes.
Oh.
Yeah. If we are actively training AI on vast amounts of our data filled with these exact euphemisms and sanitized narratives, are we accidentally teaching our future technology the architecture of moral disengagement?
That is a very unsettling thought.
Right. Are we hard-coding our own excuses into the machines? Something to think about. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.